What have I told you, veterans, that one overlooked condition, GERD, could be silently aggravating your asthma, bronchitis, or your COPD? And if it's not properly assessed, you could be missing out on both healthcare and compensation that you're legally entitled to. Today in this live stream, I'm going to be breaking down this medically accurate and VA law with actual CFR citations, not opinions. Okay. So if you're a veteran with breathing issues, this episode could change how you look at your claim. Okay. So today's episode is about being proactive, understanding how the VA actually evaluates claims, and making sure that nothing is overlooked, especially when conditions are medically connected. So we're talking about GERD, we're talking about asthma, we're talking about chronic bronchitis, we're talking about COPD, and how the VA legally recognizes secondary and aggravated conditions. Okay. So, what is GERD? Okay. Medically and legally, GERD stands for gastroesophageal reflux disease. It's a chronic digestive disorder where stomach acid flows back into the esophagus, and sometimes maybe that's your airway. This is important because GERD is not just a stomach issue. Okay. I'm going to say that again. This is important because GERD is not just a stomach issue, it's a systemic aggravator. Okay. The VA rating for GERD is rated by analogy under the 38 Code of Federal Regulations 4.114, diagnostic code 7346, okay, or known as hiatal hernia. The ratings include 10% for mild symptoms, 30% for persistent epigastric distress, dysphagia, heartburn, regurgitation, substernal, or arm pain. That is how you would get a 30% rating for GERD, and 60%, which you really don't see much of. I'm sure there are some of you out there with a 60% GERD rating, but that means that your GERD symptoms have to be extremely severe, including pain, weight loss, vomiting, anemia, or severe impairment of health. So GERD must be diagnosed and must be documented to be considered. Okay. Here is something very important I want to talk about: the GERD and asthma connection. GERD and asthma connection, the secondary and aggravation. Okay. This is where I believe many veterans miss out. Okay. VA law on secondary conditions is from the 38 Code of Federal Regulations 3.310, which says a disability which is proximately due to or the result of a service connected disease or injury shall be service connected. The 38 Code of Regulations 3.310 Part B says any increase in severity of a non service connected disease that is proximately due to a service connected disease will be service connected. So, this includes aggravation, not just direct causation. So, here's the medical reality of what GERD can do. GERD can trigger bronchospasms. GERD can cause chronic coughing. GERD can worsen asthma symptoms. GERD can also lead to micro aspiration into your lungs as well. So the VA has granted claims where GERD aggravated asthma. The VA has granted claims where asthma worsened due to reflux, okay? But only when medical evidence, and again, nexus opinions exist. That is very important. So you have to make sure that you're getting the right treatment. And I definitely advise, if you're secondary in it, get a DBQ, get a nexus, make sure you have a diagnosis, make sure that you have treatment as well, to make sure there is a direct connection of how the GERD caused that asthma. Okay. GERD, bronchitis, and COPD. So, respiratory ratings. Chronic bronchitis and COPD fall under the VA respiratory system ratings. 38 Code of Federal Regulations 4.97, Schedule of Ratings under the respiratory system. Okay. Relevant diagnostic codes include 6600 for chronic bronchitis, 6602 for bronchial asthma, 6604 is the diagnostic code for COPD. These conditions are rated based on pulmonary function tests, also known as PFTs. They are rated based on the FEV 1, FVC ratios. They're based off of DLCO scores, and they're based on the need for inhalers, steroids, or oxygen. Okay. So here's the truth, and it may be you, it may apply to you. GERD can aggravate these conditions, especially chronic bronchitis and asthma, which are often precursors or components of COPD. But again, make sure if you're going to secondary anything or try to connect something, make sure that you have the medical evidence, okay, and a nexus, and make sure that it is documented with the proper medical scientific literature, research, back sources, etc. Not all nexus letters are created equal, but GERD can aggravate these conditions, especially chronic bronchitis and asthma, which are often precursors or components of COPD. So, an important rule that sometimes a lot of veterans don't know, okay, the VA does not combine ratings for certain respiratory conditions, okay? 38 Code of Federal Regulations 4.96 alpha, okay? Instead, here's what the VA does. The VA assigns one rating under the diagnostic code that reflects the predominant disability with elevation if severity warrants it. Okay. So, what does that mean for you? That means if this is you, and you have GERD, that GERD can be aggravating your asthma, or bronchitis can influence which respiratory rating applies on your behalf. Okay. So, GERD aggravating asthma or bronchitis can influence which respiratory rating applies. This means also proper documentation absolutely is vital and matters, even if conditions are grouped together. You must have the proper documentation. Okay. Here's why, if this is you and you're listening now or later, your GERD must be assessed. Okay. Get it assessed. If GERD is undiagnosed, if it is undocumented, if it is unlinked, okay, you need to find out. You need to be diagnosed. You need to get it documented. You need to have treatment. You need to be assessed. Okay. The VA legally cannot consider it if your GERD is not properly assessed. Okay. So, what does the VA require? A current diagnosis, right? Number one. Number two, evidence of symptoms. Number three, a nexus or aggravation link. Okay. 38 Code of Federal Regulations 3.303 is the principles of service connection. 38 Code of Federal Regulations 3.159 is the duty to assist, but you must raise the issue, okay? The VA will not connect the dots for you. Always remember, veterans, the burden of proof lies on me and you, okay? That's why you want to come with all the ammo to the firefight, okay? So, a lot of common scenarios that veterans miss is GERD secondary to PTSD or medications. Maybe your GERD is aggravating your asthma after you've gotten out of the service. Maybe you're having a chronic cough, which is misattributed to smoking. Maybe you're having bronchitis that is repeatedly treated but never linked to your GERD or your reflux. And maybe it's you that has COPD worsened by long term untreated GERD issues. Okay. These are claimable pathways when properly documented. Okay. So, again, GERD secondary to PTSD or medications. GERD, that could be aggravating your asthma. Chronic cough misattributed to smoking, bronchitis, repeatedly treated but never linked to your reflux, and COPD worsened by long-term untreated GERD. Okay. So practical steps, right? Practical application. If any of this applies to you, what you need to do is you need to start telling your provider about reflux and your breathing symptoms. Okay. You need to ensure your GERD is officially diagnosed. You need to ask about reflux worsening respiratory issues. You need to review current asthma, bronchitis, COPD ratings. You need to file secondary or aggravated claims when applicable. And you need to never assume it's already covered. Okay. So it's not about gaming the system, it's about truth and justice. Okay. On your behalf. It is very, very important. Okay. Asthma, I want to talk about that for a minute. It is one of the most common respiratory claims in the veteran community, and it's rated on objective tests like the FEV1 and FVC, which measure basically how well your lungs function. So, for example, usually a 10% rating usually means you have mild impairment. A 30% rating usually means you have moderate impairment. A 60% rating usually means frequent doctor visits or steroid treatment. And a 100% rating is reserved for complete severe impairment. I hope that's not any of you all, like frequent attacks or respiratory failure. But again, here's where confusion begins. Veterans sometimes expect separate ratings for each condition. If you have asthma and COPD, but two different diagnoses, shouldn't they be rated? Not always. Under the 38 Code of Federal Regulations 4.96 alpha, the VA does not assign separate ratings for coexisting respiratory conditions that fall under the same part of the rating schedule. Instead, the VA must pick the predominant disability and rate that at the higher level. So if your COPD is more than your asthma, the VA will rate you based on your COPD alone because it's higher than your asthma rating, even if you have both conditions documented. Okay. COPD and chronic bronchitis, I want to speak on that a little bit. These conditions often go hand in hand, especially in burn pit or airborne irritant exposure cases. So my airborne soldiers, veterans out there, airborne irritant exposure cases, all of that, or if you're around toxic exposure, jet fuel fumes, etc. Very important to understand this. Okay, the VA also rates these under the same respiratory system code as well, COPD and chronic bronchitis, which is 38 Code of Federal Regulations 4.97, and they use the pulmonary function test results. Okay. Disability ratings for COPD follow a similar breakdown to asthma from 10% based on severity up to 100% based on how impaired your breathing is and whether or not you require oxygen therapy, hospitalization, or experience frequent respiratory failure. Under the PACT Act, conditions like COPD and chronic bronchitis may even be considered presumptively service connected veterans for maybe that's you, eligible veterans with certain exposures, meaning what happens? The VA presumes your condition is caused by service if you meet certain criteria, but that doesn't always tell you how it will be rated or combined. Okay. So GERD, okay, very important. Let me talk about that specifically. GERD, sometimes that condition doesn't even fall under the same system as asthma or COPD. And that's all the reason of why you can secondary this, okay? Why you can secondary asthma or COPD off of your GERD if it's indeed impacting it, okay? So the GERD, this is a digestive system condition rated under the 38 Code of Federal Regulations 4.114 and Diagnostic Code 7206. So GERD is familiar to many veterans, chronic heartburn, regurgitation, difficulty swallowing, and it can significantly impact your quality of life. The VA ratings for GERD can range from 0 up to 80%, depending on severity and complications like esophageal strictures, weight loss, or aspiration. So The tricky part, GERD is not automatically service connected because it exists. You must show that it started during or soon after your service, that it was made worse, aggravated by service, or that it's secondary to another service connected condition, again, like asthma or COPD too. Okay. You can connect GERD to your asthma or COPD. That's why I wanted to talk about this. That third option, secondary service connection, is huge. And that's what we're talking about tonight. And it's where I believe many veterans miss out. Okay. If your respiratory condition irritates your throat and contributes to acid reflux, and again, it could be the other way around. Your GERD can impact your COPD and asthma as well too. So, if your respiratory condition irritates your throat and contributes to acid reflux, or if medications for one condition worsen another, you can argue the secondary connection under 38 Code of Federal Regulations 3.310, which allows service connection if a condition results from a service connected disability. So the VA does not always explain this, okay? The VA doesn't just spell this out. That coexisting respiratory conditions often cannot be rated separately under the 38 Code of Federal Regulations 4.96. Okay. They don't explain that your COPD, bronchitis, and asthma may all be lumped into one rating based on the worst impairment, and that those may be secondary to your GERD, or vice versa, that your GERD may be secondary to one of those. Okay. Also, that GERD has its own rating schedule separate from respiratory codes, yet it can be secondary to respiratory conditions and still count towards your compensation and overall rating disability. And you need to know that for secondary service connection, you need a medical nexus opinion, not just a diagnosis. Namely, what I mean is evidence from a board certified doctor, the correct doctor or physician, linking the secondary condition to your service connected disability claim. Okay. Here's what you can do. Okay. What you should do when filing these kind of claims: get detailed medical records and pulmonary function tests. Start now. Start now. Be proactive. Ask for a DBQ, a disability benefits questionnaire for each condition. Get a nexus letter. If you need one, reach out. There's good doctors that we can point you to the right direction so you guys and gals don't get screwed over. If the VA gives you a hard time, they're willing to rebuttal as well too. Don't wing it on your own if you don't know what you're doing, and don't assume that your primary care or health doctor knows how to write this stuff. Get a nexus letter from your doctor if claiming a secondary condition, and know the 38 Code of Federal Regulations, know the CFR sections that apply to your claim. Get educated. They matter in appeals and they matter in higher level reviews. Okay. So that's what I have for today as we dive into these issues, okay? As we dive into GERD, asthma, bronchitis, COPD, secondarying some of these conditions, it is very important that you understand that you can get these things connected, and that these things can also be secondary to one another as well, if that is the case, okay? That may not be everybody, but if that applies to you, hey, utilize it. Utilize the knowledge and the education that I'm putting out. Okay. So just thank you guys for your service. Thank you for tuning in. Like, subscribe, comment, hit that notification bell. Share this out with a fellow veteran that can use this information. Stay encouraged, keep fighting, and don't give up. Till next time, I'm out of here.